everyone, welcome to Flip Video 4.2. We're going to be taking a look at what is a nation and what are the implications of nationality. So just to get us started framing in our unit of political geography, political geography on the whole is the field of geography that deals with boundaries, divisions, and possessions of countries. If you and I were astronomers, we would go out to space, or to astronauts, I should say, going out to space, and we looked back at the Earth. We would not see the map that you and I are so familiar with. You and I would not see these borders and these countries. We would simply see land and territory. So what we are seeking as geographers to understand is how is it that we have gone from this open area of land and these concepts of kingdoms and eventually evolving into our modern day countries and states. And what are the implications of those divisions? Why do we have borders where we do? How does that affect people? How does that affect the relationships between different regions? And when we talk about political geography on the whole, we talk about countries. The fundamental unit of political geographies is countries. Much like the gram is the fundamental unit of measurement in the metric system, a country is the fundamental unit of measurement in political geography. So to start us in that, we are still continuing to break down this concept of ethnicity and race. What are the ideas and the relationships between those two things? Well, now we're adding in a different element. You are very well aligned to your culture group often as people, but you also have allegiance or at least legal attachment to a government and to a country. That's what we call your nationality. Nationality is the identity with a group of people who share a legal attachment and personal allegiance to that particular country. So when we talk nationality or being part of a nation, we're talking the documentation sorts of ideas. Your nationality is who do you have political ties to. I'm an American citizen, so I do have an American passport in the United States of America. I got my Social Security card when I was born, when I became a citizen. If I was a legal resident of the United States, I might have what's known as a green card. That indicates not nationality, actually, but just simply that you're a temporary resident. But when I think about nationality, I think we need to think about the documentation, the legal attachment in that way. So that's the group of people who are a nation. But it's not quite that simple, right? Going ahead, here we go. There we go. The difference between an ethnicity and a nation, though, is that a nation of people may want but don't necessarily have that control over territory. So ethnicity still binds us in that way. Ethnicity is still our cultural identity. The difference between calling people a nation and versus an ethnicity is that a nation of people want that legal and physical attachment to land, want a legal organization with one another. That's called self-determination. Oftentimes ethnic groups become a nation because they want to govern themselves. They want to create that legal system that would unify them as a group of people. In contrast, you could think of the United States really as a multi-ethnic state. Some people may argue that in Southern California, in Southern Texas really, Southern Florida, that there are nations of people who really feel as though they are separate and should have a separate culture, separate government for themselves, in that way seceding. But for the most part, the United States is generally a multi-ethnic versus multinational state, simply because we don't have that large spread idea of territory and ownership from our nations. So again, nationality, legal attachment. These nations of people who are tied to a particular place through legal status, or they're seeking that legal status and cultural traditions. Countries seek to build that sense of nationality through what's known as nationalism. That's your loyalty and devotion to a nationality. What that means then is that we have these ideas of being bound to your so countries, I'm sorry, I got cut off there. So countries seek to build that sense of nationalism and identity here. We do that through what are known as centripetal forces. And those centripetal forces are anything that helps to unify people. It's the attitudes that unify people. So this is why holidays, parades, songs, traditions, currency, monuments, anything that people can do to build this sense of unity and loyalty is known as a centripetal force. And that creates an idea that despite our different ethnic differences, despite our just general differences, we are all still one nationality. The opposite of that, of course, would be centrifugal forces. And centrifugal forces, just like the force in physics, are things that cause the divisions, right? I need to be careful on phrasing here. A lot of people get this mixed up with push factors. It's not so. These are not things that make people leave a country. These are things that actually divide a country. So centripetal is going to unite. Centrifugal divides. Often, the various groups of nations, various ethnic groups exist within a country who want land, They serve to be as centrifugal forces. If not done properly, if not governed properly, then the diversity of a particular state actually serves as centrifugal rather than centripetal force. Another term that I'm going to briefly introduce now, but it's going to come back to us later when we start talking about countries and states. But another term that's related is this concept of a nation state. A nation state is a state whose population possesses a substantial degree of cultural unity and homogeneity. This is absolutely a theoretical example. There's no such thing as a one country that only has one ethnic group or one nation within it. But Japan and Iceland are pretty close examples. So if you see there that the culture groups of Japan, 99% of people ethnically identify as Japanese, 99% of people speak Japanese, 99% of the people within Japan practice either Shinto and Buddhism. So we see a tremendous amount of uniformity, to the culture here in Japan. So let's go back to the term nation state. Nation, ethnic group tied to land, legal attachment, right? We've got one nation of people all in one state, one country. Quite similarly, we see the case in Iceland, where you have one state, one unified idea of nation. Who we are as a people is the same thing as who we are as a country. That's closely aligned. Borders of the nation match the borders of the state. That is remarkably rare, right? Let's look at Africa. In Africa, as a result of colonialism and imperialism, European powers came in and drew these borders of states, right? Those borders have absolutely nothing to do with the ethnicities or the nations of people who live within Africa. So let's look no further here. Let's look at the case of Nigeria, right? Nigeria has an unbelievable number of amount of ethnic diversity. What that means here is we've got all kinds of different groups of people who see themselves as nations, who see themselves as independent, who feel as though they have the right to self-determination, the right to govern themselves as an ethnic identity, yet are being put within one state, right? That is an unbelievable challenge for a government to try to unite groups of people who feel far more aligned to their individual group of people, their individual nation, than this political nation that they're being told they are a part of. It is it is an epically significant task to try to undo the damage wrought by these borders that just simply these political borders that really don't attend to the needs of these individual nations of people. And I already mentioned this difference with ethnicity. Oh, and I didn't mention it before because it's coming back later. The concept of a nation and these nation states actually emerged here in Europe because before World War I, you can see Austria-Hungary, Germany. You can see that these countries then actually fell apart into what are known as nation states. That these ideas that we will separate out by ethnic groups, we have separated out into these nations, and we will all govern ourselves. So that's kind of the origins of the relationship between being a nation and an ethnic group and being a country. That actually further examples that we're going to go into far greater detail later with. You can see in Yugoslavia, in former Yugoslavia, which is in Europe, when Yugoslavia fell apart into all of these different ethnic groups, all these different nations of people, the country itself fell apart along those national lines. You can see where Yugoslavia was. When Yugoslavia fell apart into, that's something that's known to as balkanization. This is the Balkan region of Europe. And this war, which we're going to look at, this conflict, this really terrible conflict, existed when Yugoslavia was a multi-nation state, all these different nations of people all living together in one country, actually fell apart and divided up and fragmented into all of these different ethnic groups and all these different nations and ultimately all these different countries. So that's what it means to break apart along ethnic lines or national lines is called balkanization. Mentioned this term already. We're going to take a look at this in far greater detail. When we look at Russia, the multi-nation state of Russia. This is when we have a country that has multiple nationalities within its borders. Again, this is not like the U.S. The U.S. is a multi-ethnic state. We've got all kinds of ethnicities, But when we incorporate this concept of territory, we incorporate this concept that we belong to this land and we should be able to own and govern this land ourselves, then we're really starting to talk about a nationality and a nation of people. And the Russian Federation, look no further really than the title itself there, the Federation of Russia. We really exemplify this concept of the challenges of governing a very diverse country that where many people feel entitled to the land and feel like they have a right to govern it and right to live in it. So you can see that would be an excellent example of a multinational state. Similarly with China, we see in China there's even a rising amount of ethnocentrism among the Han Chinese, according to some of the recent studies, that there's this idea that the Han Chinese ethnicity or nation is the superior of them. It is most certainly the most numerous number of people in China are Han, is about 85%. But you can see that there's still tremendous tremendous number of nations within China. China's solution to that has been, of course, to impose very strict rule under communism to try to unite these many different nations of people under the single nationality of China, the government there. Now, another different concept would be the multi-state nation, and this is a nation that transcends or goes beyond the borders of two or more states. An excellent example of that is Korea, right? So the Koreans are one nation in both North and South Korea. So this is interesting because many of you may know this, that North Korea and South Korea, that border is completely arbitrary, meaning meaningless. It was drawn after the Korean War as a stalemate to draw this end of the war, and armistice, I should say. And you can see here now, you can the two areas at night, unbelievable difference in development. South Korea is extraordinarily well developed. North Korea is is arguably the most backwards country in all of Asia for sure, and in many parts of the world. And you could see that this is such a complex thing because we've got the people of Korea. So Korea, as an ethnic group, one nation of people, is actually really divided across these lines between North Korea and South Korea. So that would be a multi-nation state, right? Similarly, the Yoruba people, there's plenty I could have chosen here in Africa, but the Yoruba people serve as a good example. You see, the Yoruba are an ethnic nation who are straddled across two different states. That makes the Yoruba nation a multi-state nation. This too causes conflict because, again, we see the difference between people being better aligned with their ethnic identity and their ethnic identity than they are with their designated national identity. Last term that's very similar, what's quite related to this, is a stateless nation, right? A nation without a state. The best example of this would be the Kurds, right? So the Kurds are a group of people who were traditionally, they are seeking the creation of what's known as Kurdistan. They want to create a country, a state, that corresponds to the distribution of their ethnicity, the Kurds. The Kurds are found in Iraq, Iran, Armenia, Turkey, and Syria. In that way, they are too a multi-state nation. The idea here is that they do not have a country of their own. They are spread across multiple different countries. And right now, there's actually a rise of the Kurds have been in the news quite a bit because with the rise of ISIL, we have seen that the Kurds have had this opportunity. In Iraq, for example, the Kurds are launching their own offensive. Very interestingly, the United States supports the Kurds here because they are trying to fight against ISIL. But the same Kurds who are somewhat aligned with the Kurds in Turkey, who are all trying to create this Kurdistan, the United States does not support the Kurds here because our ally is Turkey. And our ally Turkey would not be too happy about the United States supporting this whole separatist movement here. So point being here is just simply that this concept of a stateless nation can be a pretty complicated one, and that the ethnicity does not correspond to the lines of nationality. It doesn't that these Kurds here are the same ethnicity, yet are being told that they are part of a different nationality, and that's where things get really complicated. Some other stateless nations, the Basques, we studied them when we studied an isolated language. This is in France and Spain in the Pyrenees Mountains. They have a very isolated language, very isolated culture, and they're speaking independence from Spain. Similarly, a much more successful movement right now is the Catalonian movement in the northeastern region of Spain, along the Mediterranean Sea. The people of Catalonia have long since viewed themselves as a separate nation and seeking that independence, and so they would call themselves a stateless nation as well. Lastly, another good example would be the Rohingya people. And the Rohingya people are people who are facing Muslims who are facing persecution in Myanmar, right? So in Myanmar, formerly known as Burma, the Muslim population there is facing quite a bit of persecution, and many are fleeing as a result of that. And they are seeking to create their own state. They're a stateless nation of people, have no set country in which they are found and which they govern. And they're seeking that. And you can see this is a very large movement, actually, in 2017. Here we go. Sorry, the Tibetans. The Chinese would not agree with this analysis, but many would. That the Tibetans would be another example of a stateless nation. China maintains that this area of Tibet is in rebellion, that they belong to China, but Tibet people, the Tibetans would see that slightly differently. And Tibet states that it's an independent place, thus making it a stateless nation, according to them. Nation of people without their state of their own. And we are going to pause it right there, actually right here. And that is it for now. Thanks, guys. See you in class.